Hey guys, welcome to the West Coast Initiative podcast. I'm your host, Alex Castillo, here with you with another great episode, starting 2024 with a banger. My special guest for today is Joseph Rauch. He is a book author and also a podcaster, so something we can relate to as well. You can check out his podcast with it's called Rouchin' to Judgment, right? I don't think I chopped it up. And he's another SCPA alumni, another one who's doing great things. I'm kind of proud of all my SCPA alumni. I kind of have to give them props because over here in San Diego, I'm not gonna lie, a lot of people don't know what SCPA is. And when I talk to them and let them know, they're kind of like, "What? I never knew about the school." And it's so cool because we have so many talented people from my class and every other classes too that are doing amazing things. And I definitely brought them in this podcast. If you guys haven't had a chance to listen to them, we had like a Ravion, Anissa. Crazy thing, Anissa was just at the Super Bowl. You got your podcast episode about her being an executive producer, or I don't know, executive producer, but for sure a producer on Fox Sports. Been a time. She's probably an executive now because she's doing big things. Like I said, she was just at the Super Bowl, which is awesome. But let's get back with Joe. Joe, how you doing? How you been? How's life going for you?
Hey, I'm good. Yeah, I think definitely a lot to be grateful for and some interesting things I'm working on. Some challenges too, so mixed, but yeah, we'll get into all that. I'd say I'm all right overall.
So a little bit to, I know I did a little bit of an intro saying that you're an author. Tell us a little bit more about that little career path that you chose. I don't think not at least I don't know too many people that chose to be, a writer, especially, someone who writes novels. You wrote two novels yourself. I've seen so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, basically, after we graduated from SCPA, I went to NYU, and then about halfway through NYU during my junior year, I decided I really wanted to be a writer. It came to me during this time when I got really sick. I thought I was going to have to like take a semester off or something. I got diagnosed with major depressive disorder and
Oh wow.
generalized anxiety disorder. And I had really, really severe psychosomatic symptoms and was just really suffering a lot. But the silver lining of that was my creativity really blossomed, and I realized that I wanted to be an author. I wanted to be a professional writer. So I started writing my first novel. I started doing editorial work with the school, and the Huffington Post had this college blogger program that I was able to get into. And then after I graduated, I just did whatever professional writing work I could do, and then became a full-time writer, and then basically editorial director, and have just gradually been writing my books
Wow.
and figuring out how to sell them during all that time. And now, a lot of that has kind of converged, but I'll leave it there because it's a lot to talk about. But
No, I
it's
mean we're gonna talk about it. Don't trust me. It's in the topics for sure. But let's start off with a little bit of your little backstory. I'm actually quite remembering right now. We went to Oak Park together, didn't we?
yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's funny. So to the viewers, Oak Park is an elementary school. Me and Joe went to Oak Park Elementary. That's kind of how we knew each other a little bit. And then we went to SPA. He was kind of like the first person I kind of knew at SPA, just because it was such a big school from sixth grade to 12th grade. So not gonna lie, that's kind of interesting that I just remember that we went from elementary all the way to high school. Funny thing, my son is now going to Oak Park. So he's living the legacy now. Things haven't changed. Just to let you know.
Yeah, it's funny, when I forget when, but one of the times when I took my wife to San Diego, we drove through Oak Park just so I could show her like
Wow.
what it's like and everything like that. And yeah, it's funny. I mean, it still looks the same to me, and
No, it's still
some
the same. Very same. It's crazy. Uh,
nice, yeah, some good times there.
yeah. So, like I said, obviously I knew you from such a young age. Are you native San Diegan? I know you were, your cultural background is I don't even want to chop it up, be honest, on your cultural background because I was just listening to your podcast. It's kind of like interesting what you were kind of going in depth about that. So kind of tell us a little bit about your background, you know, on your side of the family.
Yeah, yeah. I was born in San Diego, 1991, Sharp Hospital, and
I mean, not too into detail, Joe.
no, I know. But I remember that. My mom makes
Yeah,
a point of like, you were in this hospital, your little brother was in the other hospital. But
yeah.
yeah, I spent most of my life there until I was 18. My mom is Lebanese. She immigrated from Lebanon when she was 8. And then my dad is a white Ashkenazi guy from New Jersey and New
That's
York.
what I wanted to say, Ashkenazi. I just didn't want to chop it up, honestly. Yeah. So,
Oh yeah, I mean it's so confusing because to simplify it and because it's just accurate too. I mostly just say white because like I am, I'm half
mm,
white, I'm half Lebanese, Arab, whatever you want to call it. And then sometimes like if people want to know, the particular flavor of white, then I say that that's Ashkenazi. But that can be confusing because sometimes people refer to that as being Jewish, but I don't think Jewish should be used as a word for the ethnicity because I think that's very confusing. I think people should just use it to refer to the practice of the religion of
religion. Yeah.
Judaism. And so I mean, for a while I did because it was the common term, but I don't really refer to myself as Jewish anymore because I think it's confusing. And when I became a writer, I got more and more into the meaning of words and thinking about which words make the most sense. So I'm
Mm.
half white, Ashkenazi specifically, half Arab, Lebanese specifically, and then I'm an atheist in terms of any kind of religious labels, which I
Oh,
guess means
interesting.
that I don't have any kind of religious labels. I've actually been an atheist, like declared since I was in first grade at Oak Park.
Really interesting. I'm not gonna lie. I thought you. I mean, I don't mean to knock out like that, but I mean, I thought you were Jewish because I think I remember y- when we were kids, you would tell me some like that you would tell us that you were Jewish. I don't. It's such a long time ago, but I don't know how I got it mixed up that I thought you were Jewish.
I'm sure you're right because I for a long time the to me the common usage of the word is incorrect because the common usage is to say Jewish to refer to the ethnicity and the religion, both, which is
Mm,
so confusing, right? So, I used to say that because that's just what everyone else was saying and that's what I was used to. But lately, I'm kind of like, it's confusing. I don't think that's accurate. I don't know if I would ever have the influence to really do this, but one of my dreams is to try to get people to change word usages that I think are incorrect and can even be problematic and like harmful if you're just using it for the wrong context and stuff like that. Like, not that we can, this is like a whole nother topic for another time, but I think, the connotation of the word vaccine changed after COVID,
mm.
um, and I don't think that that's been a good thing for
Well,
everyone.
well, okay. So elaborate on that on that topic right now that you brought that up.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
I
like
mean, I
vaccine,
don't,
for example.
you're right. So I can only speak for myself. Like I don't want to assume it's the same for everyone. But when I was growing up, the word vaccine referred to specifically to injections that prevent you from getting that disease, right? Like you're a kid and you get all your immunizations, you get your vaccines, you get, like polio is one of the vaccines you get. And then presumably like 99 point something percent chance that you're never going to get polio. And these are diseases that really can be eradicated through vaccines.
Mm,
And then on the other hand, you have what would be called a flu shot. And the flu shot was like, okay, you're getting a dose of the flu, but it doesn't mean that you're never going to get the flu or that you can't spread the flu. It's just saying that you're getting this so that if you get the flu, it can help you better cope with
mhm.
flu symptoms. So I remember when the COVID, I call it like the COVID jab or the COVID shot or whatever, when it came out, because I don't think it's accurate to call it a vaccine because of that connotation. I remember the CDC and all these places were calling it a vaccine. And because they were calling it a vaccine, I met so many people who thought that it would like cure them of COVID. Like they would never get COVID if they took it, they would never
Interesting.
spread it, and then that led to a lot of hatred and division in the country because people would be like, oh, if you don't get the COVID shot, and if you don't get all the boosters, and if you're not first in line for every, new
You're,
booster that comes
you're gonna
out,
get COVID.
right, then you're gonna
Yeah.
get, and they would go even further and directly be like, you're part of the problem. If you're not getting it, then you're
Yeah.
part of the problem because it's gonna spread because of you. And none of that was ever true. Like the getting the shot didn't really do much to prevent or even lessen significantly the spread, and lessen people even getting it. It just meant that if you get it, your chance of being hospitalized or of dying from it is lower. And
Mm.
I think so much of why the government was able to get away with mandating it, basically tying it to people's employment and saying, if you don't get this flu shot, then we're going to fire you, was by calling it a vaccine. So anyway, that's like a side thing, but I always think of it because ever since I've become a writer, I'm constantly, constantly, constantly thinking about how incredibly powerful words are. And I've also gone through a
Sure.
political journey of going more and more and more left on the political spectrum now to a point where I'm part of kind of a left coalition of people who tend to really be staunch about bodily freedom.
Okay.
And I include uh, mandates in that, meaning that I don't think people should be forced under economic threats to take flu shots that don't even prevent the disease.
I see
So
what you. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I see what you mean on that. I mean, that's interesting. I didn't know you. So did you take the shot? I'm not gonna say vaccine. Did you take the shot and the boosters by chance?
I took it because I was forced to. There was a chance I would have lost my job if I didn't take the first two jabs, the required
Yeah.
ones. And they made me very, very sick. Like I had like a 102 fever,
Oh
and I
wow.
was just like super, super sick from them, felt like shit for like a long time. And then it didn't even prevent me from getting COVID. So I basically just suffered twice as much. And it was funny because then when I got COVID, then I got the natural immunity, and I've never gotten COVID since then.
Hmm. You know, it's
Um,
weird because how like you kind of described it right now. It is weird because in the beginning how you described it, yeah, that's how you would think a vaccine is to eradicate, a whole disease, like you said,
right.
polio. And then we did got kind of conditioned into thinking that like this was gonna eradicate COVID, and
Right.
you take the first booster shot, then you take the second booster shot, but then again, then you hear months later, then you got to redo it again, because like it kind of like wears off. And I, honestly, until speaking to you right now, I never really put that two and two together. Kind of like, oh wow, like we did have to, it kind of does, I guess, wear off, right? And
Yeah.
and and in a way, it's kind of like a flu shot, like you said. So I understand what you mean by the wording now, by what you mean on like the whole vaccine stuff. Now I'm putting the thought of all the wordings, all the words that are out in the world. To be honest, like anything that I read, like, is that a misconception? I'm gonna start thinking about you, Joe. To be honest.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate it, man. I mean, it's there, those words are just so powerful, like I mean, there were entire families that were like broken up over this issue of
Yeah,
vaccine and vaccine mandate and all kinds of
even the
things.
masks.
Yeah, exactly, right. I mean, it was all just, the whole pandemic and the lockdowns and everything just really got me thinking a lot more about civil liberty, freedom, and everything like that. And it's funny because usually people associate that only with the right side of the political.
That's what I was gonna say too. I was kind of like when you said left wing, I was low key kind of confused because I usually an argument's more for the right wing side of it, to not get like a shot or stuff like that. But
Right. That's
but
something
coming from
I
you,
learned. like going through my whole journey is that, I think a lot of people frame the political spectrum as like binary, like it's just left and right. But
Mhm.
it's really, I think it's just propaganda to try to get people to think that way, because really the left, the mainstream media often refers to is really the center. And then what I consider to be the true left actually has a lot of overlap with the libertarian right on issues of freedom
Mhm.
and civil liberties and all kind of stuff like that. So it's really interesting where, you know, there's like the left broadly defined, and then there are these two factions of the left that just hate each other and fight all the time and disagree on a bunch of issues. I'm on the further left faction of that, and ironically the further left faction of that has had more alliances with parts of the right on those kinds of issues. Like the coalition I'm a part of was against the lockdowns. We didn't
Mhm.
think that the lockdown should have ever happened or been mandated. We think it should have been a choice for people to do lockdowns. We were against the COVID jab mandates. We also thought that that should have been a choice, especially because it's something that doesn't eradicate the disease, um, and all kinds of different issues like that. So, you know, that's just being someone working in media and going on my whole journey. I've learned so much about how propaganda works, how the people who control society get us to believe these things that often aren't really true, that divide us, get us turning against each other, voting the way they want us to vote, thinking the way they want us to think. And anyway, yeah, I'll stop myself there because I could just yammer about this forever. But
Nah, I mean, that's cool, man. I mean, I'd love to get into those topics as well. I mean, I mean, you're going in depth with it. Honestly, I didn't even know about like the kind of like what you said, the left wing is really the center, and that there's actually more people on the other side of a other left kind of thing. So I never knew about that. So that's kind of, I'm learning myself about all the situation. Like you said, I don't want to get too much into another tangent, but let's go back a little bit to the, back end of your story. During high school, were you always into writing? I mean, I remember you were a piano player. You were very also gifted in that as well. I don't know if you still practice it, but were you always that was like your passion from the start, just writing?
I always enjoyed it to an extent, and I had an affinity for it, but I wasn't like totally in love with it. I hadn't fallen in love with it, and I wasn't thinking about it as a profession. I enjoyed music a lot, but the more I did it, the more I did like gigs and everything. Speaking of, that's, because you said mentioned having Amber on, like that takes me back to me and her and a few other people doing like little gigs as part of the jazz combo. And even though I enjoyed that a lot, I was kind of like, man, this is really tough, and like I'm probably going to be broke for the rest of my life if I make this my career, especially because it's funny because people thought of me as being pretty good at piano, but I never really saw myself as like talented at it because I started really getting out into the scene and seeing other people who were just actually really talented. And I was just like, whoa, like I can't compete with that. I don't know if I want to compete with that. And then on top of that, I was starting to develop all of these health problems. Like I had a lot of muscle stamina problems I was developing, and
During high school?
ultimately, yeah, during high
Really?
school. I mean, I
Yeah.
started developing like a lot of the chronic health issues I have now when I was 12. Um, and I was really good at managing it, so it was kind of always under the radar, and like I didn't really talk to people about it much because it was hard for doctors to diagnose it. So I'd kind of just had my little routine for dealing with it even in the middle of school, and people never really noticed. But then I developed new problems, like with my arm, and it kept getting worse and worse, and eventually I could barely play piano anymore at
Oh
all.
wow.
um, So I was going to be a therapist. I thought I would be a good therapist, and I decided to do a psych major after high school because of that. But then I developed another problem with the mental illnesses I mentioned earlier, and then that was when I had this big, big, big awakening, and I realized, like, no, like I I'm in love with writing. This is it. This is what I'm going to do, which is so ironic because I was like, oh, I'm not going to be a musician because I'll be broke. And then I was like, became a writer and I was super fucking broke for a while because you do not make a lot of money. Like most writers barely make any money. But anyway, yeah, it was just such a weird, like tumultuous journey and so much changed in really just a few years.
Well, you said, you know, when you decided, you said, "Oh, I fell in love with writing." What made you fall in love with writing? Because kind of just it sounded like you just kind of like, this option's done, this option's done. Oh, I love writing. But what made you love like that decision at that moment? Like, you know what, I love writing.
That's a good question. Yeah. So the year leading up to when I really had my big like breakdown and got diagnosed with the mental illnesses, I started having a lot of more disrupt. I used to have disruptions of my sleep anyway, but I had even more disruptions of my sleep, and I stopped dreaming. For a whole year, I didn't have any dreams, and
Wow.
and I didn't know why. I was like, why? Why is this happening? And then right before I started my junior year, my body just really, really deteriorated. Like I didn't sleep for like 4 days, and I felt like I was gonna die, and my digestive system kind of shut down, and it just felt like my whole body was
How old were
shutting.
you? How old were you, Joe, at this time? At this time?
This was when I had just turned 20.
Okay.
And I had been going to therapy. I didn't want to go because I didn't understand that it was a mental issue. But my parents were like, you should really go. Like maybe it would help. So I went reluctantly. And then when I had that 4 days with no sleep, my therapist was just like, hey, I wasn't going to rush this, but like, this is serious. You haven't slept for 4 days. I think you have major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. I think those are the main two causes of your sleep deprivation right now. And you need to take an antidepressant immediately, like right now, or else you're not going to sleep. I guarantee it. And it didn't make sense to me at first. I was like, what? Like, I can't sleep because I'm depressed. I didn't, even though I was doing a psych major and I really should have known better. I mean, that's not the kind of thing they teach you in a psych
Yeah.
major.
Plus,
So,
you're 20 years old. I mean, we're I think the mental health issues has recently come up within the last few years. Like it's been really more common to bring up mental health issues within the last few years. I remember in those years when we were, barely graduating, that wasn't really a thing, So I mean, we how could you had grasp it at 20 years old?
you're right. Yeah, that's a good point. So then I did start to understand it. I took the antidepressants. I continued therapy, and I realized that the reason I had become ill with the depression, at least, was that for a whole nother health issue that I can maybe go into later, I had developed these negative beliefs since I was 12. And I had been telling myself over and over again that I need to deal with all of this alone. I can't grieve over it. I can't, no one's going to help me with it. And I had just really been holding in all of this pain over having to deal with these tough issues on my own from such a young age.
Hmm.
And then I didn't realize that all of that holding it in and all of these negative beliefs that I thought were protecting me were actually poisoning me. And it ended up all just coming out, crying all the time and just dealing with so much anger. But then my dreams came back, and not only did my dreams come back, but even though my sleep was still pretty bad, during the little bits of deep sleep I would get, I would have these nightmares where I was dying, and it was just really, really intense. And I realized that there was this part of me deep down that wanted to die, that believed,
Wow.
hey, like your body is always going to be suffering like this, and the only way for you to get relief from it is if you die and you just can't feel anything anymore. And I remember I had this kind of discount therapist from NYU because there was like this program where you get like 12 weeks of therapy or whatever for free. So he wasn't that great because it's like, therapy I was getting for free. And I told him about the nightmares, and his solution was like, well, you'll be fine. Like, you don't really want to die, right? Like, it'll just, it's fine. It'll pass. And I was like,
Wow, well, great help.
uh, yeah, great, great advice.
Oh my God.
So I tried to just ignore it. And then when I ignored it, it just made it even worse. The nightmares were just even more intense. So then one day I was like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to ignore it. I just kind of told myself, like, you know what? Just hit me with all the nightmares. I'm just going to confront all of it and embrace it and just get through it. And the night I decided that, the entire plot for my first novel told itself to me in one dream.
In one dream.
One dream. And all I had to do was wake up and write down the bullet points of what was happening.
Oh.
And and after that, I was just like, man, I love this so much. Like, it's such a rush. It's so cathartic, and I just felt like I was meant to do that. And that had to just be the main
Was that like
thing.
your first writing when you started doing when you started dreaming?
Not the first, but it was the first time I finally felt so certain and focused, and I didn't have any doubts about it anymore, not at
Mhm.
all. And I was just like, this is it. No more figuring it out. No more just, this is it. This is what I want to do with my time, with my career, and even just as a craft, not even for money necessarily.
Mhm. So, you talk about NYU and you're going through this mental stuff, it's very hard for you, but you make the decision from going from San Diego all the way to New York,
Yeah,
which is crazy, like, what you're going through. And I'm assuming you're alone, right? Throughout this whole process. I don't know if you have family in New York. Do you have family in New York at this
I
time?
do. I was mostly alone.
You're mostly
Um,
alone? Okay.
my aunt Anne and her husband and I guess their kids at the time lived in New York, but it was like
Oh,
in
and
the
you live in sorry to cut you off. New York City, very busy. It's not very kind also as well. You know what I
no.
mean? How did you deal with all that, the fast pace, New York life, also dealing with your issues too?
Yeah. The first year was tough. Like, it was a big adjustment, and I didn't really make friends my first year because which was weird for me because I was used to having like a pretty good social life and just generally liking people around me and people liking me well enough. But my freshman year, I didn't like the people on my floor, and they didn't really like me. And that's like a whole nother story, but that kind of just isolated me socially. So I guess the main way I coped with it my first year was to just have really, really tight routines and be really, really scheduled and focused. And that helped me a lot. And I liked at least that in Manhattan, the grid is actually very organized in terms of how the streets are laid out. Like, you have just numbered streets, numbered avenues.
Mhm.
So even though it's overwhelming in terms of all the people and everything going on, it's actually pretty easy to get around.
No, yeah, New York. It's surprisingly, it is very easy to get around. I've been in New York, I think 3 times or 4 times. Got engaged in New York. I love New York. Honestly, every single time I go. but it's very easy to get around, to be honest, in the subways, go all the way to 63rd or 43rd. Like you said, the grid system makes it very easy to roam around New York.
Yeah, definitely. So that helped, and then I couldn't see them all the time, but being able to see my aunt helped. My grandma Helen, when she was still alive, being able to see her really helped. And then in my sophomore year, that was when I made a lot of like started making a lot of like lifelong friends in New York, like people I'm still close with, people I'm probably always going to be close with. Um, so that helped me cope. And then in terms of the decision to even go to New York, it was kind of funny because like I was not one of those people who really cared at all about where I went to college. I was just kind of like, this just seems like one of those very time consuming, like expensive sort of adult chores that people want you to do. And if you don't do it, they're going to nag you and make you feel bad about it. So I
Hmm.
was just like, all right, this is just like a chore that I need to get done. And I don't really care where I do it. But NYU was the best school I got into. So I just talked to my parents and was like, should I go here? Like, it's the best school I got into, but it's all the way over in New York. It's expensive. Like, it's going to put a burden on you. It's going to put a burden on me. We're going to have a lot of debt over it. And they were just like, yeah, you should do it. Like, it's the best school you got into, and it's a great opportunity. So I was like, all right, I guess I'll do it for that reason. But it probably was the right decision for me because, I mean, San Diego is way better for other kinds of opportunities, but um, NYU and New York and everything is definitely better if you're deciding to be like a writer or do something in like media or the arts, as opposed to like not all of the colleges in San Diego, but a lot of them.
No,
So
NYU is prestigious. Like, uh, I'm not gonna lie, I'm intimidated talking to you because you come from NYU. You know?
oh, hey, look, it really doesn't mean anything. Like
Yeah.
I don't think of myself as a particularly intelligent person or gifted or any kinds of those
Well,
things.
you're too humble, Joe, but you are.
No, I mean, I take pride in some things. I think
Yeah.
I've worked very hard in some areas. I think I've done a lot to become emotionally intelligent and informed and to try to make up for mistakes and all those things. Like I take pride in that, but look, like I met so many fucking morons at NYU. Like it doesn't necessarily mean that you're smart or anything like that. It really just means that you applied there and they liked, something about your application. I didn't, it's funny, I didn't even get into the specific school I applied to. I applied to the College of Arts and Sciences and they sent me a letter and they were like, we don't think you're good enough for the College of Arts and Science.
Wow.
What about this experimental liberal studies program that we're doing? And I was like, all right, whatever. It doesn't really sound much different to me, and I still get to go to NYU, so I guess I'll just do that.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that was it.
And even though you said there was morons, you have to have some great mentors at NYU for your writing career. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Obviously I've had my mentors throughout my career. I give them praise all the time, chefs, coaches and whatnot. Tell me about you. Like obviously you've had great mentors in your life.
For
But
sure.
by the way, time out, Joe. Is it possible we can? I'm gonna stop this right now, and I'm gonna redo this the whole meeting because I forgot that I stopped paying for Zoom, so it's about to stop me recording in about 2 minutes. So I'm about to send you another link again so we can continue the podcast. All right? So
That's
cool.
totally fine. I'll just
Yeah.
look out for it and see
All
you
right.
on that. But I
Sorry.
got your question in mind and I can
Yeah.
answer it.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that, Joe. I'll do it really quick. Okay.
That's okay. Same thing has happened with me.
There we go. Back in action. All right. Back to the mentor question. Sorry, guys. I had to do a little quick pause there. But back to the mentor question. Who are your mentors in NYU?
Yeah, so the main people I can think of, I guess the first person I won't mention his full name because he's not really like a public figure, but I had a TA in one of my psychology classes who just really like was kind to me and patient with me during a hard time when I was being kind of difficult because I was unleashing so much emotion after so many years of holding it in. And I guess that wasn't really for writing, but I feel like he was a great mentor just in terms of showing me what it would be like to become the kind of like mature, responsible man I wanted to be someday. Which was kind of hard for me because I realized later on that I had, even though I was like nice most of the time, I had like a huge maturity deficit. Like I I would while out,
I've heard the Joe stories.
yeah, yeah. That took a while for me to really get a hold of. I mean, fundamentally, I still have that same spirit in me. It's just more under control now. But he was a big influence to me. In terms of more public figures who really influenced like the craft of writing, I had a professor named creative writing professor named Muhammad N. Ali, just to make that distinction, not Muhammad Ali, Muhammad N. Ali.
Golly.
He is the author of The Prophet of Zongo Street, which is this great short story collection that kind of draws from his days growing up in Ghana. And I thought he was just so great for so many reasons. Like, nice guy, amazing professor, master, just absolute master of the craft of writing and of the English language. And it just showed me too that like if English is your second language, sometimes that even pushes you to master it more than a native speaker because you actually have to learn uh, really structural aspects of it. So I was kind of like, whoa, like this guy's English is like way better than mine, even though it's his second language. And he just has such a mastery over it and
Wow.
over the meaning of words and sentence construction. And he instilled a lot of ideas in me that I still draw on today about how I evaluate the quality of storytelling and whether my stories are working, whether they're the best they can be. He's also the guy who referred me to the Huffington Post College Blogger program, where I was able to really cut my teeth. And, I mean, that looks good on your resume.
So,
So
so
that
you work for the Huffington Post too?
well, it didn't pay me, so I
Oh,
didn't,
okay.
wouldn't say I worked for them. But there was this college blogger program they had where you're able to just
Uh,
like write for them. I don't think they don't have it anymore, but at the time it was a really big deal, and I was able to publish some pieces with them. I mean, I look back on those articles now and I feel like they're so cringe because I was like young and just didn't really know what I was talking about, but it helped me cut my teeth. It helped me get some, add to
Competence.
my portfolio, put stuff on my resume that really helped propel my career. So I owe that to him. He's a wonderful guy. It's been a long time since I really talked to him, but we have kept up. Like we've chatted online, and I'm hoping to, maybe as part of my business I'm working on now, I can do an interview with him. So he's
Oh, that's
great.
cool.
I had another professor, Saeed Sairafiazadeh. He's the author of When Skateboards Will Be Free, which is a cool title. It's his memoir about being half Iranian, half Ashkenazi, and growing up with his parents as members of the Communist Party in America. Um,
Oh, wow.
so he also was one of the best professors I had. I was so happy because I nominated him for the Outstanding Professor Award, and then he won it
Oh, cool.
after I nominated him. So he's great. I've kept up with him. He ended up doing a quote for my first novel and reviewing it, and he's just huge, huge inspiration to me. And I've been to some of his readings. So I'd say he was a mentor. I also did an internship with Warren Adler, who passed away. He was already very old when I did the internship with him, but he's the author of The War of the Roses and many other books. And The War of the Roses was got turned into a movie with Michael Douglas and
Yeah.
Kathleen Turner. um, and Danny DeVito. So he's was very successful, and I got to do the internship with him, and that really like showed me kind of what it meant to be a commercially successful author and how to think about like the commercial aspect of being an author. We didn't really get into like the craft of it very much because that's not really what I was his intern for. Like it was like a
What do
marketing
you mean by commercial author? What does that mean?
like meaning the aspect of being an author where you're pitching your manuscript to agents and you're trying to get a book deal, you're trying to get it traditionally published, and then you're thinking about the process of selling it, getting PR for it, trying to sell it as a movie too. I helped him do that. I would
Oh, wow.
write documents for him that would help him pitch his books as movies. I don't know. Maybe I didn't do the best job because I don't think any of those books have been made into movies to my knowledge,
Not
but
yet, not yet, Joe.
not yet. It could happen. It could happen. So, but yeah, I just learned so much about that aspect of it. Whereas I feel like the other mentors I had, I learned more about what it meant to do the actual writing and
Mm.
like the craft of creative writing.
So, okay, so I'm very new. I'm not gonna lie, I'll say I'm kind of naive or ignorant to the whole writing career. Anybody who's listening to the podcast and is like, oh, I never knew writing careers. There's so many different pathways. Like you just said, novel, or you could be a writer for a show, or you could be a writer for something else, or writer for the Huffington Post. Um, you know, what what really are the different type of choose like career paths in writing necessarily?
That's a great question. I know a lot about this, so I can outline it really quickly. One of them, which very, very few people ever do because it's incredibly difficult, is being a full-time author, meaning that you are spending your full-time hours writing books and your income is coming primarily from checks from selling the rights to your books or royalties from sales of your books. That's the way I would define really being a full-time author. That's just my definition of it. You know, it's a little subjective, but I don't think you can really claim that your day job is being an author unless you actually are supporting yourself financially from that.
Mhm.
That is what I wanted to do originally. I very quickly realized that I would not be able to just snap my fingers and do that because I couldn't even get an agent, let alone a deal, let alone like actually selling a significant number of copies of my books. Luckily, what I ended up also falling in love with, which is my other passion, you know, arguably tied with the creative writing, is journalism, which is where basically you make money writing for an online publication, whether it's like a news site or like a blog for a brand or something like that. That's what a lot of people would call journalism or content writing. There's traditional journalism where, let's say you're working for a company like Vice or Forbes or the Wall Street Journal. Then, if you're like a content writer, quote unquote, that's when you're doing writing that's basically the same as journalism, but it's appearing on blogs for brands. Like, let's say that the San Diego Padres have a blog, right? And you're doing news articles and advice articles and all kinds of stuff like that that are appearing on the San Diego Padres blog. You would call that like content writing
Mm.
uh, or being like a content marketing writer or whatever it is. That's what I ultimately ended up doing. And then I worked my way up to being basically an editorial director. Another type of writing is technical writing, where you're writing like instruction manuals or, very, very technical instructions and templates and stuff, either for companies or for consumers. That's
Oh,
called
that's a
technical writing.
thing. I didn't know that was a thing.
It is.
Wow.
I deeply respect people who do that because I know it doesn't sound super fun, but it's very challenging, like to actually write an instruction manual where the vast majority of people can follow your instructions perfectly and they're not going to be getting confused or complaining or anything like that. So, I mean, technical writing, it's instructions or sort of like taking very technical concepts and translating that internally for a company.
Wow.
There's also copywriting, and usually copywriting refers to very short writing. Um, like if you're doing like a tagline, like "I'm loving it" for McDonald's, like the person who came up with that, that's copywriting, and coming up with like
Kind of like the story of like the Nike Just Do It kind of thing.
exactly, exactly. That's like one of the most brilliant pieces of copywriting in history. Just do it. I'm loving it. All kinds of stuff like that. And it can also be like maybe very short lines that you're going to see on like episode descriptions or on like a Netflix homepage or all kinds of like short little pieces of writing, usually more designed to get people to do something right away.
Kind of like turn
That's
their head a little
copy.
bit. Kind of
Wait, say
like,
it again?
sorry, kind of like turn your head to like, like kind of like, oh wow, didn't even think about that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Very like short, gotta get people just
Attention.
within like a sentence or a few sentences at most. That's copywriting. As opposed to like some of the other forms I mentioned earlier would fall under the umbrella of what people call long form writing.
Mm.
Other types of writing I can think of, if I haven't mentioned already, screenwriting, meaning you're writing a script for a movie or a script for a play or for a commercial. That would still be screenwriting, I would say. And yeah,
Well, screenwriters right now, I mean, like I said, I'm pretty naive in the whole topic. I believe screenwriters right now is like the biggest thing right now that they're doing a lot of strikes now, in the recent years, just because they haven't been getting paid. Kind of like what you said earlier, a lot of writers don't get paid necessarily. How does so let's keep on kind of slide into that topic. Sorry to cut you off kind of short on that, but
no,
I know there's a problem with getting paid in the writing community. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Like someone who doesn't know what's going on, can you tell us a little bit about that?
yeah, absolutely. So there are a few main reasons why it's so hard to make enough money as a writer to pay your rent and especially to make stable income or even good, money. One is that it's incredibly competitive. So many people want to be writers. It's very attractive to a lot of people, either because it's just fun or because they have an ego about it or because they think they're going to make it big. So you have so many people trying to do it, and you have to compete with all of those people. And the more competition there is, the easier it is for people to justify not paying you very much because they can just say,
Mm.
well, we'll just get someone else who will do it for even less money than you. Um, Another reason is that, well, this is more of a modern reason. This wasn't always the case, but artificial intelligence, AI, is a big factor. AI generally produces writing that's pretty bad because the technology just is not good enough yet to produce really high quality writing. But a lot of employers are fine settling for bad writing, so they'd rather just have an AI do it for free or for like, a $10 a month subscription or something like that, as opposed to hiring some kind of really skilled writer. Um, and then another reason is that it's hard to get,
I didn't even know there was AI writing, to be honest. I was kind of mind blown about that.
yeah,
How does a computer know how to, how does like that even know how to write? I mean, it had to have like what, some defaults, or does it really pick and choose what to, you just give what keywords to the AI, or how does that even
Exactly. You
work?
just give it some keywords, or you give it a very, very short prompt, kind of like an essay prompt, and it can spit out like a whole essay for you. Now,
Really? Wow.
that essay won't necessarily be that good, but
Yeah.
for a lot of employers, they're kind of just like, all right, fine, it's something. And then they'll just take that. Speaking of getting things for free, another reason why writing is so competitive and so why it's so difficult to actually make money doing it is that so many people are willing to write for free, either because they're doing it as a hobby or because they're doing it just because they want to be in a certain publication or whatever it is, and they're not doing it for money. So that makes it even harder because you have to compete with the AI, and you have to compete with all the other people who are trying to do it for money, and you have
Hmm.
to compete with all of the people who are doing it for free, some of whom are actually pretty good. Like, just because you're doing it for free doesn't mean that you're not good at it. You have to do all of that, and then on top of that, if you're a freelancer, or you're doing like contracts or whatever, it's hard to get consistent work. You might have a lot of work one month and then it's gone the next month. And then even if you do get a full-time job, that full-time job is usually not valued very highly and it's not very stable. Like when there are layoffs, which is like a huge problem now, the writers are often the first people to be laid off. It's like the writers and the recruiters and the HR people are like the first on the chopping
Wow.
block. Companies do layoffs. So it's brutal, man. It's a really, really brutal career path. And I usually tell people not to be discouraging, but just like be honest about how much you want it, because there are easier
It's
things you can
it's
try to do.
definitely kind of like what I tell to the cooks too. I mean, I'm a chef myself, and
Right.
it's not a very pleasant like career path, so to say. I mean, you're always on your feet. You're sacrificing the holidays, you're sacrificing the weekends because that's when the money comes for the restaurants. So always tell my young cooks, like, really, if you're really gonna be passionate about this, like, be passionate about it. Be sure that you want this every day, because I've been in the industry for more than 10 years, still in it. And I still have to have I have my ups and downs. Like, man, I hate it sometimes, and man, I love it sometimes. You know what I mean? When I get creative in my own space of my own food, I love it. But when it gets, the stressful of the stresses of maintaining the kitchen, running the kitchen, running the whole business, making sure labor's good, like it can kick your ass for sure. uh but that's why I always tell my cooks, because a lot of times the money's not there in the chef world, you know what I mean? It's not like you're gonna be making It's not like you go to culinary school. And this is what I tell the guys. Like, not like you go to culinary school, you come out of there and you become a chef. You're good out of culinary school, you become a cook, honestly, and then you work up to be a chef. Culinary school was cool and you learn the fundamentals, but the real work is in the kitchen, and that's when you really earn your stripes. And then even when you earn your stripes during that time, you're making, I mean, at least when I mean, minimum wage has increased quite dramatically already this year. But when I was first starting to work, I was making $10 or $9, I believe, in a kitchen job, or $12 when I first started, and the cost of living just keeps going up, and to a point where like some cooks are working two jobs. They don't have time for their. I have one cook. His name is Charlie. Shout out to Charlie. This kid is, he's devoting himself to the kitchen life, because he's working from, I think his only days off is Tuesday, and he's working every single day. And on top of that, he's going to culinary school right after he gets off from work. So, and he knows that the reward is not necessarily as big, but the passion is big. And I believe my passion is big, and your passion is big for your writing, right? Which is why we sacrifice, right? For we obviously we'd want the big dollars, and it'll come our way. The more experience that we have, the more challenges we go through, the more we push ourselves, the money will come. But the passion has to stay there for you to really kind of like dig in and grind it out. So I mean, I admire what your work, Joe. I mean, I didn't know about the whole writer situation. I didn't know how competitive it was, and you're right. I never thought about like oh, this guy's doing it for free. Why am I gonna pay? Because honestly, that's what a business person's kind of think. Like, get the cheapest thing as you can. So that's interesting that you brought that up. Uh, you did write two novels. One novel was the last of the mentally ill. Oh no, yeah, the last of the mentally ill, and Teach Me How to Die. Teach Me
Mhm,
How to Die, I believe, is your first book. How
mhm.
was that? How was that first experience of writing your first book, and then how did that get you to going into the second book? What did you learn from your first book that you changed up on your second book, and what did you learn also from your second book that maybe want to do a third book?
Yeah, those are great questions. So I'd say the experience writing the first one was very slow. It took me a lot longer than I wanted to, and there were a lot of there were some ego issues I had around openness to self-publishing, where with my first book, like I spent so much time trying to pitch it to agents and get it traditionally published because I really believed that that was the only legitimate way to move forward with it. And eventually I was like, because I kept getting feedback from agents where they would say, "Oh, this is good. You can write well. We can tell that you're a professional writer, but we're still going to say no." And I was kind of like, huh, like,
Did
so
you
it
ever
doesn't
ask
matter.
why?
Right. They would, or wait, say that just to make sure I heard you right.
Did you ever ask why? Like, what was the reason? Did they ever give a reason why? Like, oh, you're good, but no.
I did, and eventually many of them did give a reason, and it was the same reason over and over, or it was basically the same two reasons over and over again. One reason was that it didn't fall neatly into one genre, like, and that's how a lot of people, you know, decide whether they're gonna say yes to a pitch. Like, let's say you pitch someone and it's just like a straight up like romance book or something. And all they have to do is look at it and say like, this is just a romance book. It isn't anything else. I know exactly what this is and it's very simple and I would know how to try to pitch it to a publishing house. My books are different. Like they looked at my books, my first book, and they were like, well, this is literary, which I mean, literary doesn't even really have a clear definition. It's basically just a euphemism for saying that the writing is good and it's not trashy and it sort of has a certain like aura of to it that's kind of hard to describe. So they were like, this is literary, but it's also fantasy because it's set in the afterlife and because it's both, it's not super neat. And I don't feel like it's worth my time to try to pitch it to a publishing house. And then the other reason they would give, and they would do this even when they would say that it was what they were looking for, is they would just be like, yeah, it's just not like emotionally resonating with me as much as other stuff, which is like, you can't help that, that's totally subjective.
Yeah.
And eventually it just made me realize that the whole literary agent pitching process is really just a lottery. Like you either get lucky and you'll get an agent, or you won't, and then you won't get an agent. Now, of course, you need to come correct with your pitches and make sure you've done your due diligence. But I did all that. I hired an editor to help me with my pitches and make a list of agents, and I did everything I possibly could to make sure I was sending great pitches
If you don't mind
to
me
the right
asking, how
people.
many how many agents did you go through?
I think for Teach Me How to Die, I did like 100, and then for
Wow.
the last of the mentally ill, I think I did like another 100.
Holy shit.
And every single one of them said no, and they all said no for one of those two reasons I just mentioned, which is either
Yeah.
just it doesn't fit into it doesn't fit neatly into what I'm looking for, or okay, it does fit what I'm looking for, but I'm going to say no just because I wasn't like vibing with it, basically, which is just I can't, you can't help that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's really a lot like dating, where you can go on a date with someone who's like, I'm looking for this, 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 and you check all those boxes. You go on the date with them and they're just like, yeah, you check everything I said I wanted, but I'm just not feeling it. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And you just have to respect that. And that's what it is. So much of going through the process for both of them was realizing like, man, like this really doesn't have anything to do with my writing skill, like whether I get an agent or not. So, there's kind of a stigma to self-publishing. And I eventually just got over it. I was just like, I'll just do my best and try to make it get the best outcome I possibly can. So I hired editors. They helped me edit the novel to make sure it was as good as I could realistically make it at the time. And I hired designers to make sure that it looked really professional. And it does, like no one has ever looked at my books and been like, oh, those are self-published books. In fact, every person I've ever met has assumed that my books are traditionally published because they look really professionally done. So I learned a lot about that through writing both of them. And then for Teach Me How to Die, like it took me a lot longer than I wanted to. I started writing it in 2011, and between just writing it, like that took many years just to finish it. I mean, that probably took me until like 2014 at least. And then it took a few years after that to do all those agent pitches, get rejected, figure out why I was getting rejected, edit, edit, edit. And then in the meantime, I was growing a lot as a writer and improving my skill. So it's funny because by the time I actually published it in 2017, I was a much better writer. And I thought about rewriting it. I was like, shouldn't I just rewrite it with the level of skill I have now, as opposed to like the fucking scrub, like amateur level I had in 2011? But ultimately I decided not to rewrite it because I was like, it's not going to have that spirit of that pain and that intensity I was in 2011 if I rewrite it now. So I kept it and I tried to just edit it to be as good as I can make it realistically. So The Last of the Mentally Ill was super, super different because I was starting writing it in 2019 with a way higher level of skill. Like I had trained with professionals. Like I had a managing editor from the Associated Press and CNN who just like,
Wow.
she was just amazing, like taught me so much of what I know as a journalist. And then her assistant managing editor, like helped me improve so much. And I had a supervisor at my next job who really helped me improve. So I was just a way, 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 way better writer. So it's funny because some people like Teach Me How to Die better than The Last of the Mentally Ill. And again, it shows you, unfortunately, that the quality of writing is not as big of a factor as you would like it to be as a writer. Like to me, Teach Me How to Die is like dog shit compared to The Last of the Mentally Ill. Like it's really not good. But that's just how I feel, right? Like other people are,
Yeah.
my wife prefers Teach Me How to Die over The Last.
Really?
She enjoys it more, even though she acknowledges, like objectively, she read the Last of the Mentally Ill, and she's like, okay, this is better. Like this is definitely more well written. But I enjoyed reading your first novel better. So they're different books. Like
You
the
think it's
first
because of the
novel,
story per se, and how like maybe your first novel was more of a, like you said, it was more of your spirit, you were driven. It was like kind of like, I wouldn't say, I'm not saying that your second book didn't have that same passion, but it
yeah,
sounded like the second book had more of like, I'm gonna show my skill more so than
yes,
the actual story. I mean, I don't want to like be subjective. I might be wrong. I haven't read the books yet, but that's what it kind of sounds like. It sounds like your first book, passion. I'm going all in for this, and it sounds like your second book was like, let me get, let me show my skills of what I've learned the last few years. So that's probably what probably why your first book is probably more well loved because of your spirit of it.
yeah, exactly. And I think it says a lot about the reader too. Like some people prefer my second book. Like my dad prefers my second book over my first book. And it's basically like my first one is kind of like if you want something shorter and more like, intense, more hot takes, more, controversy and all that kind of stuff, then that's the book for you to read for sure. If you want more like rich character development and you don't mind that it's not as fast in the beginning and you want more kind of, you know, just more fleshed out kind of content and you're looking for more skill in the prose writing, then you'll definitely like the second book better. And then to answer part of what you mentioned earlier about what I'm thinking for the third book, my third book is the one where I feel like it's really going to be the culmination of my journey as a not only an author and a writer, but as a leftist too.
Mm.
The first two books, like, I wouldn't say that they're very political. Like, the first one is kind of just, there's like this one reference to Trump that honestly, like, a lot of people didn't like it. I was kind of on the fence about it. My wife told me not to even put it in, and I didn't listen to her. I should have, because so many of the negative reviews I've gotten are just like, why do you have to put that in? Like, I was liking it until then. I don't know. I might even take it out, honestly, but that's it. Like it just has like I don't know, like 2 minutes arguably of politics and the whole book. And then the second book, I guess it kind of depends on how you think of politics, but it just doesn't, I wouldn't say it really has very much politics in it, unless you think of mental illness as like a political issue inherently, which I don't know, it can be, but to me, not really. The third book is it's going to be about a like a dark kind of doppelganger version of myself if I had decided that traditional publishing was so important to me that I was willing to do anything to make it happen, like lie, cheat, steal, blackmail people. So it's basically this like dark version of me. And then to justify that, I have this person grow up in like a really fucked up household. Because I was lucky to grow up in like a pretty loving home and all that kind of stuff. So and then it's he's half Palestinian, half Israeli American, this character. So it also really gets into a lot of issues of, and his parents die specifically because of corruption in the two-party system. So it gets into all this stuff of like it's a novel, but it's
How
also
far
sort of
how far
like
along are you on the third book? Because it sounds like you already got a pretty well done already.
I haven't really written the draft yet, but I have
Uh,
like tons and tons and tons of notes about it. And it's basically I need to take those notes and formally make an outline and character profiles and everything like I did with the first two books. And then I write the draft. But I already know more or less what it's going to be about. And
so that's kind of like the little process notes, start doing character development, picking here and there kind of stuff, and then write the draft.
exactly. That's always, always, always my process. And I think it's a really good one where it's like you go from just the raw, like, the raw, like, sewage of my mind, and then crafting that into, okay, this is scene by scene how it's going to go. These are the character profiles. These are the arcs that these characters are going to have. These are the relationships these characters are going to have with each other. These are the themes and how those themes, how the rhetoric is going to be expressed. And then once I do all of that, then I write the first draft. And it's nice because usually my first draft is pretty good because I've done all of those things and I don't have to do such extensive edits when I start editing it and doing a second, third draft and so on and so forth.
So, you know, obviously you're going to working on your third book. Must speed along a little bit ahead just because we have a few minutes left. I know you're doing
Yep.
your podcast. How did you get into that podcast? I only listened to one episode, and it was I started seeing your political views in that one too, and you talk about your ethnicity, Jewish, kind of like that's why kind of in the beginning of the episode I didn't want to chop it up and say something wrong, but what is your intention with your podcast, Rouching with what was it? I'm not
Roushing to judgment.
Rouching the Judgment, yeah.
Yeah, it was funny. My coworker actually came up with that name. And the podcast is that like another reason I became a writer is because I feel like I was always running my mouth and getting into trouble and having like this big typhoon of thoughts that was more kind of captured. I felt like it was better expressed through the written word. But as I got older, and I met more people who really enjoyed my rants and just, they thought my rants were really funny and even like the really dirty stuff. They were just like, oh, that's funny. Like, and so I had a bunch of coworkers at one of my jobs who kept nagging me to do a podcast. They're like, do a podcast, do a podcast. And I was like, well, I don't know how to do a podcast. So how about I'll do it if you set it all up for me. And all I have to do is just talk into the mic. And so we launched it, and it was really, really popular in the office. Like people would just be dying laughing, listening to it in the middle of the workday. And so then as I started to develop this whole business content idea, which is the big thing I'm working on now, which is ultimately going to sell my books and get affiliate commissions on other people's books, I decided that the podcast should be a part of that whole business ecosystem.
Nice, sweet. Oh yeah, man. And so I definitely got to listen to a lot more podcasts because the that one episode, at least a few like wasn't too as funny as Gracious because I know you were getting a little bit more political, but if there's some laughter for sure, I'm gonna definitely listen to more episodes of that.
Oh
Uh
yeah, it's a mixture, man. Like if you just scroll down through the episodes, like you can pick out the ones. Like, I mean, I feel free to like cut this out if it's too raunchy for this episode, but like I do an entire episode about head. Like entire like 30, 40 minute episode about head is episode 5. So it's
yeah.
like it has some of that and
It's
some of
still
the
you're still the
opposite.
same Joe. You're still the same Joe from high school.
Exactly, exactly. I just, I got a little more control over it,
Yeah.
but the sewage is all still there.
Well, that's good, man. I don't want to cut it short, but it is getting kind of late, and I got like a 2 minute mark on my end. Uh, where can people reach out to you? Where can people buy your books? How can people follow you?
Oh, thanks so much, man. Yeah, I'll just get that out real quick. J Rauch 64 on X or Twitter or whatever. Joseph Rauch author on Instagram. That's probably where I do a bit more is on Instagram. And I'm on Threads now too with that same tag. I'm probably going to launch a TikTok soon. The podcast is Roushing to Judgment. It's Rauch because my last name is spelled weird, which is a whole nother story. JosephRausch.com. My 2 novels are Teach Me How to Die. Make sure you look that up with the book keywords. Otherwise, it's going to give you like a suicide warning. And then the last of the mentally ill. So just if you look up even one of those things, I will be eternally grateful. Appreciate any support and support Alex's podcast. I
Thank
already
you so
listened
much.
to an episode. I'm loving it. I think it's great. So yeah,
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it, man. Glad to have you on here. And it's not gonna be the last time I have you on here. Hopefully the next time I have you on here, you already published your book, you're already in the process of it. And or maybe you're gonna tell us about your journey through it. So glad to have you on here, and I'm very gracious for you to be on here. And we'll catch you next time, Joe. Thank you so much.
awesome. Anytime, man.
Hey man, thank you so much, Joe. I don't know if it's gonna